Before we begin, picture this. 3 years, that is how long you have been gone, swallowed by a war so savage that soldiers call it the Red Maw. Every scar on your body is a receipt. Every nightmare is a memory you earned. You didn't fight for land or gold. You fought for him. Andrew, your mate. The Alpha King who pressed his forehead to yours under a blood-red lunar eclipse and swore that your bond was the foundation of his kingdom. You carried that promise like a holy relic through mud and gore and freezing nights when your wolf Martha howled just to feel something besides pain. You win, you survive, you come home a legend. But when you push open the doors of the Great Hall, armor still caked in battle dust, the room goes silent. And there on the throne is someone else, a woman who has never seen a day of combat in her life, wearing the crown you bled for, wearing his mark on her neck. What would you do? Would you burn everything down, or would you realize that the real war had only just begun? If you have ever sacrificed everything for someone who forgot you existed, this chapter is for you. Don't look away. The screams of the dying still lived inside my skull. Even here, standing in the heart of the Iron Throne's fortress, breathing clean air for the first time in 3 years, I couldn't rid myself of the sound. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, a reminder that I had survived things that should have ended me. My name is Martha. The world calls me the blood-stained Luna, the woman who broke the spine of the rogue rebellion and came home wearing their surrender like a second skin. 3 years in the Red Maw, 3 years of iron rations and cold resolve and one singular, burning reason to keep breathing. Andrew. I had his promise stitched into my soul. I had fought for it, bled for it, refused to die for it. The heavy oak doors of the Great Hall groaned as I pushed through them. My boots hit marble with a sound like a funeral bell. And then silence, the wrong kind of silence, not reverence, shock. The air didn't smell like home. It smelled of jasmine, of expensive silk, and of a mate bond that wasn't mine. I saw Andrew first. He looked older, more regal, completely unfamiliar. Then I saw her. Lena, a beta's daughter who had spent the war in the safety of the palace, draped across the seat that belonged to me, wearing the crown I had bled to protect, Andrew's mark fresh and dark on the curve of her neck. The bond in my chest, the tether that had dragged me back from death 1,000 times, didn't snap. It did something so much worse. It began to rot, slow, agonizing, a quiet devastation that told me Andrew hadn't just moved on. He had erased me entirely. Martha, Andrew breathed. His voice held none of the warmth I had died for. We thought the Red Maw had claimed you. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I stood in the doorway, a ghost of a war he wanted to forget, and understood with brutal clarity that my real battle had not yet begun. They burned her belongings, gave her a servant's room, but they forgot one thing. They forgot she was still alive. Keep listening. They gave me a guest room. Not my chambers, a guest room. 3rd corridor, east wing, the kind reserved for minor dignitaries who didn't matter enough for the good linens. I stood in the doorway staring at the narrow bed and the cold, unlit hearth and said nothing. The young Omega who had led me there couldn't meet my eyes. His hands were shaking. We both knew what this meant. I thanked him quietly and closed the door. I didn't sleep. Before dawn, I was moving through the palace like smoke, my boots silent on stone I had walked 1,000 times. My portrait had been taken down from the entrance hall. A meaningless landscape hung in its place, peaceful, decorative, as if I had never existed. My war room had become a sitting room, pink curtains on the windows. My armory, 7 years of collected blades and custom-fitted armor, was empty, swept clean as a bone. When I found the head housekeeper and asked, she told me without looking up that the Luna had ordered it cleared. Burned, most of it. What couldn't burn had been melted down. I walked out before I did something I couldn't take back. The ancient boundary stones sat at the far edge of the inner grounds, half swallowed by gnarled roots. I went there because it was the one place no one from court would follow. I stood among them with my arms crossed, my jaw locked, and let my wolf Renat pace furious circles inside my chest. You look like someone who just found out they've been buried alive. The voice came from the shadows, low, unhurried, the ease of someone who feared very little. I turned. A man leaned against the furthest stone, dark, assessing eyes, built like someone forged rather than born, broad-shouldered, radiating quiet authority that had nothing to do with a throne or title. He wasn't Iron Throne Pack. I would have known him. And you, I said evenly, look like someone who shouldn't be inside our boundary stones. The corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile, something more careful than that. Rhoda, he said, and I'd argue the person who belongs inside these stones is standing right here, not on a stolen throne back in that palace. Renaa went very still inside me. I held his gaze and said nothing, because he wasn't wrong, and I had never been in the habit of arguing with the truth. She fought beside a stranger and felt something she never felt with the man she called her mate. What does that mean? Find out now. We heard them before we saw them. The howl that split the pre-dawn air wasn't a pack howl. It was fractured, directionless, rogues running hot and stripped of reason. I counted 4 distinct voices in 3 seconds. Rhoda counted faster. 6, he said, already moving. 2 flanking east. I was moving before he finished the sentence. There was no discussion, no negotiation. He went left around the boundary stones and I went right, and somehow, in a way I had no time to examine, it felt less like a decision and more like water finding its natural level. Renaa surged forward and I let her take the wheel, the shift rolling through me like a breaking wave, and then I was forepawed and low to the ground, cutting through frost-stiff grass in near silence. The first rogue came through the tree line at a dead sprint. I hit him from the side before he cleared the stones. The fight was brutal and brief, claws and leverage, and the viciousness of a wolf who had been doing this for 3 years and had run completely out of patience. He went still. I was already turning for the second. Rhoda had taken 2 simultaneously. I had fought alongside Andrew twice in joint campaigns. He was powerful, everyone knew it. But fighting with Andrew had always felt like fighting near someone. Parallel lines that never quite touched. I had learned to cover his gaps, anticipate his blind spots, quietly absorb the slack so the soldiers watching wouldn't see it. Fighting beside Rhoda was nothing like that. He moved, and the space he left was exactly the space I needed. I struck, and he had already neutralized the angle that would have caught me vulnerable. No signals, no commands, just a wordless, fluid grammar that neither of us had been taught and both of us already spoke. By the time the 6th rogue broke and ran, I was bleeding lightly from a gash along my ribs, already closing, nothing serious. Rhoda crouched nearby in his shifted form, watching the tree line. He shifted back, rolled his shoulder once, glanced at my side with the look of someone assessing a fellow soldier, not a wounded stranger. You fight like someone who's been covering a weak left flank for years, he said. The accuracy of it landed somewhere uncomfortably close to the bone. And you fight like someone who doesn't need covering, I said. He looked at me steadily, said nothing, but something shifted in those dark eyes, recognition. The particular understanding that passes between people who have both survived things they don't speak about in polite company. I picked up my jacket from the grass and didn't let myself think too hard about what that silence meant. He had the nerve to offer her a mistress arrangement. Her wolf's response will make your jaw drop. Don't skip this. Andrew found me at noon. I was in the eastern courtyard running drills with 3 of my soldiers, men who had survived the full 3 years with me and had quietly, wordlessly, refused to return to their barracks until they knew where I stood. Andrew crossed the yard alone, which told me he understood that arriving with guards would have been an insult he couldn't walk back from. I finished my combination and handed my training blade to Kale without looking away. My soldiers moved to the far end of the yard, close enough to witness, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. Andrew stopped a few feet away. He looked older. Softer in the jaw, harder around the eyes, the aging of a man who has been making choices he can't entirely live with. Martha, he said my name like an apology and an explanation at once. There are things I need to say to you. Then say them. He exhaled slowly. When the intelligence reports came in 6 months after you left, they said your battalion had been overrun. No survivors confirmed. His voice was carefully level. I mourned you. The entire pack mourned you. Lena was there and the pack needed a Luna and I. You replaced me, I said. I understand the sequence of events, Andrew. I want to make this right. He stepped closer, and I recognized the expression, the particular look he wore when he believed his wanting something was sufficient reason for me to provide it. You could stay, not as I know this isn't what you deserve, but as a senior commander, an honored position. We could find an arrangement that... Renaa detonated. She didn't ask permission. One moment I was standing still. The next she was pressing against my skin like a wall about to collapse, a snarl tearing from my throat that silenced every sound in the courtyard. My hands shifted at the knuckles, claws fully out before I caught her, dragged her back, held her by sheer grinding will while every muscle in my body shook with the effort. Andrew had stumbled back 3 full steps. His face had gone the color of ash. The courtyard was completely, perfectly silent. I retracted my claws slowly. Let the silence sit long enough that everyone present, my soldiers, the palace guards in the archway, Andrew himself, understood exactly what they had just witnessed, not a loss of control. A warning, delivered with absolute precision. An arrangement, I repeated, my voice level again. No. I picked up my blade and walked back toward the far end of the yard. I did not look back. The council tried to strip her title. She walked in with a chest. What was inside it silenced 9 elder wolves. Read this chapter twice. I want to make this right. He stepped closer, and I recognized the expression, the particular look he wore when he believed his wanting something was sufficient reason for me to provide it. You could stay, not as I know this isn't what you deserve, but as a senior commander, an honored position. We could find an arrangement that... Renaa detonated. She didn't ask permission. One moment I was standing still. The next she was pressing against my skin like a wall about to collapse, a snarl tearing from my throat that silenced every sound in the courtyard. My hands shifted at the knuckles, claws fully out before I caught her, dragged her back, held her by sheer grinding will while every muscle in my body shook with the effort. Andrew had stumbled back 3 full steps. His face had gone the color of ash. The courtyard was completely, perfectly silent. I retracted my claws slowly. Let the silence sit long enough that everyone present, my soldiers, the palace guards in the archway, Andrew himself, understood exactly what they had just witnessed, not a loss of control. A warning, delivered with absolute precision. An arrangement, I repeated, my voice level again. No. I picked up my blade and walked back toward the far end of the yard. I did not look back. The council tried to strip her title. She walked in with a chest. What was inside it silenced 9 elder wolves. Listen to this chapter twice. The summons arrived before breakfast. Crisp parchment, the council's 7-pointed seal. Language so formal it bled cold, the words of men who delivered daggers with clean hands. I was requested, and we all understood that word to mean commanded to present myself to the council chamber at the 3rd bell. To discuss, the letter said, the matter of my continued presence within Iron Throne territory. My continued presence, in my own pack, in the home I had bled for. I sent back a single line of acknowledgement and spent the remaining hours sharpening every blade I owned. 9 elder wolves sat waiting when I arrived, silver-templed, robed in the deep gray of their office. Andrew at the center, his expression carefully neutral, the face of a man who had arranged this and was pretending otherwise. Lena was absent. Cowardice, I decided. Elder Croft spoke first with the measured cadence of a man accustomed to having his words carry the weight of law. The pack required stability. The current arrangement, his word for Lena's installation, had been conducted according to proper succession protocols given the confirmed intelligence of my death. My return, while remarkable, created an instability the pack could not afford. It would be best, most dignified, if I were to formally relinquish my Luna designation and accept. I walked to the chamber doors and opened them. Two of my soldiers entered carrying a heavy iron chest between them. They set it on the council table without ceremony and stepped back. I crossed the room, lifted the latch, and folded back the lid. 9 faces went the color of old ash. Inside the chest, the heads of the 6 rogue warlords who had spent a decade tearing at the Iron Throne's northern borders. Men the council had been voting to negotiate with for 3 years, while I was handling the matter permanently, in the field, with my hands. I let the silence do its work. Then I closed the chest, turned to Elder Croft, and said very quietly, "Tell me again about instability." Not one of them spoke. I left the chest on the table and walked out. Behind me, the chamber stayed silent as a grave, which, for 9 men who had just remembered exactly what I was, seemed entirely appropriate. She survived a war. She survived betrayal. But could she survive being framed for treason in her own home? This chapter will wreck you. The evidence was elegant. I had to give Lena that. 3 forged letters bearing my seal. Seals that had been locked in my burned armory, seals that no longer existed, which meant someone had made new ones with considerable skill and considerable patience. The letters were addressed to the Asheville Territories War Council, allegedly written during my campaign, allegedly offering Iron Throne border coordinates in exchange for safe passage. Treason of the clearest, most damning kind. I found out at dawn, when 6 palace guards arrived at my guest room door. I stood in the doorway in my boots and traveling coat. I had stopped undressing fully to sleep 3 days ago, some animal instinct refusing to be caught unready, and I read the entire situation in the careful way the guard captain was not meeting my eyes. "Am I being arrested, Torvin?" I asked. He had served under me for 2 years on the Northern Front. His jaw worked silently. "I have orders, Commander." "That's not what I asked." He looked up then, just briefly, and in that look was everything, the apology, the helplessness, and the warning. I went out the window, before he finished raising his hand. I moved fast and low through the palace's outer grounds. Through the gap in the eastern wall I had quietly catalogued the first night back out of pure battlefield habit, and into the gray woodlands beyond the boundary stones. Renat pushed speed into my legs I hadn't known I still possessed. Behind me, the first alarm bell began to toll. I ran for 2 hours without stopping. The stronghold found me before I found it. Or rather, the man leaning against a pine at the edge of a ravine, arms crossed, apparently unsurprised, found me first. "I wondered how long it would take," Rhoda said. I stopped, breathed, let my heart rate drop from a roar to a growl. "You knew this was coming." "I suspected Lena was building something." He turned toward the ravine's far slope, where shadows between 2 rock faces concealed a door that had no business being there. "Come inside. You can be angry at me for not warning you once you've eaten something." I wanted to argue. I was too tired, too hungry, and he was too obviously right. I followed him in. Skull, she thought Andrew chose to forget her. The truth was far darker. Lena didn't just steal a crown, she stole a mind. Brace yourself. The stronghold was older than it looked and better supplied than it had any right to be. Rhoda's people, a quiet, watchful handful who moved with the economy of those long accustomed to operating without an audience, fed me without fanfare and asked no questions. I ate. I slept 4 hours, which was 3 more than I expected. And when I woke, Rhoda was at the stone table with a map and a woman I didn't recognize. Her name was Sira. She had the hollowed eyes of someone running on conviction instead of rest, and the faint chemical smell of a healer who works with compounds rather than just herbs. She had been inside the Iron Throne fortress until 6 days ago, Andrew's personal healer for 3 years before that. She laid out what she knew without preamble, the way people do when they've been waiting too long to say it. It had started within weeks of my departure. A tincture introduced into Andrew's evening wine, tasteless, incremental. The kind of compound that produces no single dramatic symptom, but accumulates across months into something that looks indistinguishable from grief, from stress, from the ordinary erosion of a king under pressure. His suggestibility deepening, his judgment clouding. the slow, patient dismantling of a man's ability to trust his own instincts. Lena hadn't seduced a king. She had chemically disassembled one and rebuilt him according to her own architecture. And 3 months ago, Sira said, it had gone further. A secondary compound introduced into the eastern reservoir. The one that fed the barracks, the kitchens, the servants' quarters. Not enough to kill, enough to dull, enough to make an entire pack of wolves slightly slower, slightly less likely to question, slightly more inclined to follow whatever mood their Luna projected into the room. The silence that followed had weight. I looked at the map. At the thin red line Rhoda had drawn from Lena's family territory to the Iron Throne's eastern gate, a supply route. Regular, ongoing. How long have you known? I asked Rhoda. Long enough that I should have moved sooner. Something underneath his even voice wasn't steady. I was still building proof. I didn't anticipate she'd move against you before I had enough. I thought about Andrew. About the man I had left 3 years ago versus the hollowed, uncertain figure on the Iron Throne. Thought about how easily I had attributed the difference to betrayal, to weakness, to simple lovelessness. Renaa made a sound inside me that wasn't anger. It was something older and more complicated than anger. How many people in the pack are still clear-headed? I asked. Rhoda met my eyes. Enough, he said, if we move quickly. She came home to be welcomed. Instead, she had to raise a sword again. But this time, she wasn't fighting for him. She was fighting for herself. Lena's family moved at dawn, the way cowards always do under cover of the last dark, banking on a pack too dulled, too divided, too leaderless to mount a real defense. They miscalculated on all 3 counts. Rhoda's forces were already positioned at the tree line when the first wave crested the ridge. 40 wolves, lean and disciplined, bearing no Iron Throne colors, but fighting with the kind of focused brutality that doesn't require a flag. I ran at their head in full shift, Renaa finally, completely unleashed, and the ground shook with the sound of 2 forces meeting at full speed. The gate was already compromised by the time we reached it. Lena's men had pushed through the eastern corridor, the one defended by soldiers still operating at half capacity from the poisoned reservoir. I shifted back at the wall, took a sword from a fallen guard, and went in on 2 legs because the corridors were too narrow for anything else. I found Andrew in the inner courtyard. He was fighting. I'll give him that. Whatever Lena's compound had done to the edges of his judgment, it hadn't taken his body's memory of combat. He was holding the center of the courtyard against 3 soldiers with the kind of grim, cornered ferocity of a man who has nothing left to calculate, just survival. I took the 2 on his left flank. Before he registered, I was there. When the 3rd fell, we stood 6 feet apart, both breathing hard, both bleeding. Andrew stared at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, completely stripped of kingship, of authority, of the careful architecture of a man accustomed to controlling how he was perceived. You came back, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. I came back for my pack, I said, not for you. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply the truest thing I had said in months, and we both knew it. Something in his face accepted it, quietly, painfully, the way a wound accepts a blade that's already in too deep to pull cleanly. There was no time for more. Rhoda's voice cut across the courtyard calling positions, and I turned toward it without hesitation. I left Andrew standing alone in the place that used to be ours. I didn't look back. The battle was still happening. My people still needed me, and I had stopped waiting to be chosen by someone who couldn't see my worth clearly enough to keep it. She won the war. She broke the poison's hold. Now came the hardest battle of all, choosing herself. This ending will stay with you. The dust settled over the Iron Throne like snow, slowly, quietly, with the exhaustion of a place that has been holding its breath too long. Lena was in custody by mid-morning. Her family's forces had broken when the second wave found Rhoda's wolves already waiting, a contingency Rhoda had prepared for and said nothing about until it was needed. The poisoned reservoir had been sealed. Sierra was overseeing treatment protocols. It would take weeks, perhaps months, for the pack's full clarity to return, but the bleeding had stopped. Andrew found me at dusk, on the ramparts above the eastern gate. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not in stature, in the way that men shrink when the architecture they've been hiding behind finally comes down. He stood a careful distance away, and for a long moment neither of us spoke, just looked out at the darkening tree line where the last of the battle's evidence was being quietly managed by people with torches and steady hands. "I know I have no right to ask," he said finally, "but I need you to know that the man who replaced you, that wasn't me, not entirely. What Lena did." "I know what Lena did," I said. "Sierra explained it clearly." "Then you know it wasn't." "Andrew." I said his name once, gently, the way you speak to someone you have genuinely loved and are genuinely letting go. "I know the compound affected your judgment. I know you mourned me. I know the last 3 years were not entirely a choice." I paused. "And I also know that understanding something is not the same as being able to return to it. Some bridges don't hold the second crossing." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally left, he didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me that somewhere beneath the fog Lena had built around him, he had always known. Rhoda was at the base of the rampart stairs when I came down. He didn't ask how it had gone. He simply fell into step beside me as I walked, matching my pace without being asked, occupying the space beside me the way he always did, as though he had been made specifically to fit there. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. Such a simple question. No politics in it. No agenda. Just the genuine, open inquiry of a man who intended to follow wherever the answer led. I thought about it honestly, for the first time in longer than I could measure. "Build something," I said. "Something that doesn't require me to make myself smaller to survive inside it." Rhoda nodded once, as if that was the most reasonable thing he had ever heard. We walked on together into the cooling dark, and behind us the Iron Throne's torches burned steady and bright, and for the first time since I had come home, the weight on my chest felt less like a wound, and more like a door swinging open. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it too.